I'm not talking about Sonic Chronicles right now. I was originally going to, but that episode got really big, and I don't want to rush it out just so that I can say it's out. I would rather wait to deliver on the cliffhanger from last episode to put out a quality video than to just put out a video that is only like half of what I wanted it to be. Hey there, I'm Ashley. Welcome back to AshyMuted, the show about the Chao Garden. Last time, I introduced 3 new Chao, Terios, Beta Soup, and Riala. While talking about the character Chao, I brought up something called the Tiny Chao Garden, but never explained what it was. If I'm going to explain it, I have to give some context for the game that brought it into existence, Sonic Advance, and why this very overlooked trilogy is so important. I know it's very obvious to most of us, but if you somehow don't know, I want to teach you. The year is 1994. The Sega Saturn just released in Japan. The console was specifically designed with the Japanese market in mind, and it ended up becoming the best-selling Sega console in the country. By the end of Christmas that year, it had outsold the PS1 by around 200,000 units. By the end of its run, it had outsold the Nintendo 64. All of this was without their mascot franchise. 1 year later, 1995, Sega of America didn't have confidence in the hardware. They thought it would be too expensive, and with it having such a massive focus on the Japanese market, they didn't know if it would be worth it. I don't have to tell you how well the Sega Genesis did in the West, almost entirely thanks to Sonic and the cheaper price when compared to the Super Nintendo. To have a console that didn't have either of those selling points follow it up would be a massive risk. Eventually, they decided to release the console on September 2nd, 1995. May 1995. The first E3 ever has begun. Sega announces, out of nowhere, that the Saturn would be releasing immediately at $399. Later that day, well, I'll just show you.
I'm going to ask Sony Computer Entertainment President of America, Steve Reyes, to join me for a brief presentation. $299.
A high price and a shadow drop, competing with the excitement of the PlayStation and its lower price, almost killed the Saturn on release. The lack of a new mainline entry in the franchise that made Sega a household name in the region is what kept it dead. The Dreamcast released in November 1998 in Japan. I don't need to tell you how great and ahead of its time the console was. There are tons of other videos that will do that for you. The release was rough, with shortages of some of the chips that were needed. Pre-orders had to be closed after only 2 days. The 500,000 consoles Sega wanted to have at launch was cut down to 150,000, and it sold around 140,000 units in 3 days. It did well financially, sure, but the launch overall was a disaster. Shortages, a tiny selection of launch titles, it just wasn't ready. So when would it be? 9/9/99, maybe the most iconic console launch date in history. Sega had learned from the mistakes of the Japanese Dreamcast launch and the American Saturn launch. The hardware and software had time to improve. Sonic Adventure was ready to be a launch title. Pre-orders sat somewhere around the 250,000 mark, enough for Sega to claim that this was the most anticipated console of all time up to that point. The initial launch was a massive success. It was still in last place, though. The N64 had a 3-year lead, and the PlayStation, well, it was the PlayStation. Then sales started to slow. The PlayStation 2 was getting ready to launch, and it took all of the attention away from the competition. We all know how the PS2 ended up. I don't need to explain how it killed the Dreamcast. It was the PS2. The Saturn's launch in the West was the wrong console released at the wrong time. The Dreamcast was the right console, just also released at the wrong time. The death of the Dreamcast nearly killed Sega as well. They were already on their way out of the console market with bad decision after bad decision. Releasing the Dreamcast when they did was the nail in the coffin. Sonic Adventure 2 came to the GameCube as Sonic Adventure 2 Battle in December of 2001 in Japan, being the first Sonic game on a Nintendo console. The bitter rivals finally working together, putting the console wars behind them. On that same day, the first Sonic game made specifically for a Nintendo console also released. Sonic Advance, a 2D platformer for the Game Boy Advance, bringing Sonic back to basics. Yeah, I know, we hate using this phrase in regards to Sonic nowadays, but back in 2001, this was a huge deal. Nobody played Sonic Pocket Adventure. You might not have known it existed. So to the general public, this was the first time the franchise had gone back to the classic formula since Sonic & Knuckles in 1994. Alongside the traditional platforming gameplay, it included the Tiny Chao Garden. Now, before I start talking about it, I want to make sure some progress is made with Malachite. I left off with them needing to evolve, so here's what I'll do. While I'm playing Sonic Advance, I'll also have the Chao Garden running in the background. I'll put it down here and have the camera follow Malachite. Going in, there's not much here. Just a cursor and an egg. You can move the cursor over the egg to pet it, which will cause it to hatch. Chao from the Tiny Chao Garden already have a name when they hatch, and their stats start at level 1 instead of 0. This is how reincarnated Chao act in the main Chao Garden. Is this not my child? You can change their name pretty easily here, no fortune teller required, but I'm just sticking with what it already has. There's a ring counter in the bottom right of the screen, so how do you get rings? Up at the top of the screen, you can see 2 Game Boy Advance icons. Pressing on one takes you to one of 2 minigames. First up is this weird rock, paper, scissors timing-based thing. It's not super interesting, and the ring payout doesn't seem to be that great. The other one is a pretty simple matching game, but a Chao will actually come in and move some of the stuff around after the cards are flipped, but before the actual game starts, which is actually a pretty fun twist. The payout is also amazing. I don't see a reason to play the other game at all. There's a third method of getting rings, and that's just playing the game, which is easily the best option, assuming you don't suck like I do. You can use your rings to buy a fruit, a toy, and eggs. I was lucky enough for the egg to be the Onyx egg. If only there was a way to link the Tiny Chao Garden to the PC port of Adventure 2. I could cheat it in and just excuse it, because it's in the shop. I technically could grind 20,000 rings and transfer it over to the Chao Garden, if that was an option. That's where that sentence ends. I did it. Introducing Crystal, the Onyx Chao. Again, I'm saving the explanation of the Jewel Chao for a later video. All you need to know right now is that they're rare Chao colors. Kind of. Again, I'll explain later. I'm not entirely sure what to do with Crystal yet, so let's just keep moving forward. Oh god, the Chao are talking again. I know it's not unexpected anymore, but it's different when it can be one of your Chao saying stuff like this to you. You know what, Popoko? Get that mohawk. Don't let anyone stop you. The year after Sonic Advance 2 was released, and it also included the Tiny Chao Garden. I'm not seeing it here on the title screen, though. Huh, let me just look this up real quick. You have to beat the game and collect all the Chaos Emeralds with a character. No thank you. Sonic Advance 2 is infamous for its special stages, especially how you enter them. To get into a special stage, you have to find 7 special rings in a stage, in one run, without losing a life. Then you actually have to beat the special stage to get the emerald. Repeat at least 7 times. This is annoying once, now imagine doing it 4 times to unlock Amy. Guess I'm skipping this game, and oh my god, Malachite evolved and I didn't even see it. I got it on recording, I just wasn't looking. Wow, that's their first A rank. That all S rank goal is looking more and more possible. Anyway, on to the next game. I bet you were expecting Sonic Advance 3, huh? Sonic Pinball Party released in 2003 to reception? Maybe? I barely hear anyone talk about this game. The gameplay is just some basic pinball, sure, but it's actually a crossover with Knights and Samba de Amigo. Hey, is that new one any good, by the way? Genuinely curious, please let me know. This game also has a story mode, in a pinball game. Yeah, this is definitely one of the stranger games in the series. Alongside the main modes, the Tiny Chao Garden returns. Oh, looks like you start with 100 rings this time, neat. Let's open that egg. Minan, huh? Oh, they're drowning already. This really is the perfect Chao Garden experience on the go. Oh no, split ends, my poor hair. I think there's a theme with the dialogue I'm getting. Let's check out those minigames. We've got a bubble popping thing that I suck at. Let's try that again. I think I'm starting to get it. Obviously, you're trying to match colors to keep the orbs from getting to the bottom of the screen, and sometimes some rings will drop for you to catch. I'm not entirely sure how the orbs are cleared, though. I'll give it another shot. Yeah, still not entirely sure, but that run was definitely better. Turns out it loops infinitely, so that could be a really good way to make rings. Time to check the other game. Oh, it's just the matching game again. Huh. Oh hey, the Onyx Egg is back. Yeah, I know, Minan. Thanks, bud. I'm gonna get sidetracked now. I'm really interested in that story mode. Okay, so Eggman's turning gambling addicts into robots. We have to stop him by doing a pinball tournament? It's over, Sonic. I've turned those addicts into robots. If you want to stop me, you're going to have to win this pinball tournament. Oh, I see. You made some elaborately designed obstacle courses, designed sort of like pinball tables for me and my buddies to go through, and, along the way we'll smash up your robots and save the animals, right? No, it's just pinball. Pinball where the balls, right? No, it's just pinball. Hey Sonic, you aren't going to the tournament, are you? You should give it up before you hurt yourself. Knuckles, it's pinball. Ah, I see how this is going to be. Level after level of get this many points on that board. Yep, this is pinball. Alright, I'm done. Time for the last game. I lied. That was the last game. The Tiny Chao Garden wasn't in Sonic Advance 3. By the time it came out, Sonic Heroes was the most recent game in the series, and it didn't have a Chao Garden. What was the point of a Tiny Chao Garden without a main Chao Garden to connect it to? With the main Chao Garden never returning after Adventure 2, we never got another Tiny Chao Garden either. But I don't think we've actually seen the last of it. The Sonic Frontiers updates have shown that Sonic Team is listening to and accepting feedback. Better control, fixing the third act of the story, adding more playable characters. All things that people were asking for. Another thing the fanbase has been asking for? The return to the Chao Garden. It turns out that it was thought about at some point in the development of Frontiers. They just couldn't figure out the best way to implement it, which is really weird considering, like, the whole cyberspace thing. They just sort of put the portals for Big's fishing locations around the map. They probably could have done that with the Chao Garden. Plus, the Chao were, like, really relevant to that game's story, so, like, would have been the perfect time to bring them back, but whatever. Anyway, if possible, they'll actively consider it for the next game. If we do end up getting the Chao Garden back in the next game, I think there's a good chance we could see a spiritual successor to the Tiny Chao Garden in the form of a mobile app. A lot of people, including myself, have ideas for a standalone Chao Garden mobile game, but I've heard almost nobody bring this idea up. After today, I really appreciate the Tiny Chao Garden. It has its place in the overall gameplay loop, and I hope we haven't seen the last of it. Speaking of not seeing the last of things, I think I finally have an idea for Crystal.